Sawadee ha. Warm greetings from UNESCO. My name is Justine Sass. I am the Chief of the Section of Education for Inclusion and Gender Equality at UNESCO headquarters. It is my pleasure to present to you today the results of our global report, The Price of Inaction, the Global, Private, Fiscal, and Social Costs of Children Not Learning. I present this report on behalf of UNESCO, OECD, and the Commonwealth Secretariat. I would also like to acknowledge Professor Giorgio Brunello and Professor Lorenzo Rocco, both from the University of Padova in Italy, who authored this report with us. Let me first answer the question, why do we do this report? UNESCO believes that education is a fundamental human right for all, essential for personal development and well-being, but also critical for tackling many of the world's problems and most pressing challenges, including poverty reduction and social injustices. With this report, we wanted to know what the price of not fulfilling this right looks like for countries and the world at large. In our report, which is the first of its kind, we consider the costs for individuals, governments, and societies for 1, children and youth who leave school early, and 2, children and youth who do not achieve basic skills. We present these costs disaggregated by different cost components and by sex to see if there are differential impacts for boys and girls. We also estimate the impact on some non-monetary costs, including those related to corruption, crime, tax morale, and early pregnancies. What did we find? Let's see a short video with some of our key findings.
Today, 128 million boys and 122 million girls remain outside of school walls. And around the world, far too many that are in school still lack basic skills such as reading and socio-emotional skills to succeed in life. Meeting the promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to leave no one behind remains a challenge. But not meeting this promise also has a significant cost. In the first report of its kind, UNESCO, OECD, and the Commonwealth Secretariat have calculated the price of inaction. This groundbreaking report considers the cost for individuals, for governments, and for societies of children leaving school early and having less than basic or low socio-emotional skills. What did we find? By the year 2030, if we stay on the current path, trillions of US dollars will be lost to economies around the world. How much? According to our estimates, private costs annually amount to over 9 trillion US dollars for children with less than basic skills and over 6 trillion US dollars for children who leave school early. Fiscal costs equal annually over 3 trillion US dollars for children with less than basic skills and over 1 trillion US dollars for children who leave school early. Social costs annually amount to 10 trillion US dollars for children with less than basic skills and 6 trillion US dollars for children who leave school early. And loss of GDP annually amounts to 7 trillion US dollars because of low levels of social-emotional skills. And beyond these enormous figures are other costs to individuals, governments, and society of additional increases in early pregnancies, crime, and young people not in education, employment, or training. Government and international financing for education to meet the Sustainable Development Goals must remember the price of inaction. We must invest more equitably, and invest more efficiently in education. For our children, for our future, for us all. Read the report and be part of the action.
I'd like to deep dive now on a few of these key findings. First, our global figures on the cost of inaction. As you've seen, if no action is taken, by 2030, globally, the annual cost to society of early school leavers and children with less than basic skills will equal 6 trillion US dollars and 10 trillion US dollars respectively. These figures are really staggering and hard to conceptualize. To try to put this into perspective, let me share that 10 trillion alone is greater than the combined annual GDP of France and Japan. How do we get to these figures? To calculate the costs for individuals, the governments, and societies, we estimated the GDP loss caused by early school leavers and those with less than basic skills. The approach is really bottom-up and starts with private, fiscal, and social costs. That includes, for instance, loss of labor, income, fiscal revenues, and private and public expenditures, such as health and law enforcement spending. These estimated costs are added up to obtain country-specific costs, and we then add these costs up to provide estimates of regional and global costs. A point of interest on gender. We found that the global costs of early school leavers and children and youth with less than basic skills are slightly higher for boys than for girls. This is mainly because more boys are out of school globally than girls, and the share of boys with less than basic skills is also higher than the share of girls with less than basic skills. The only region where the cost of early school leavers is higher for girls than for boys is sub-Saharan Africa. I'd like to now turn to some of our findings by country. We looked at 20 different countries, 10 of which the price of inaction was at girls' expense, so more girls having less than basic skills or early school leavers, and 10 countries where it was the opposite in the case of boys. I'm going to give you two examples under each of these two different contexts. Let me first start with Tajikistan. Tajikistan in Central Asia is one of 10 countries that we examined that had disparities in education at girls' expense. Over the last decade, Tajikistan has experienced strong economic performance with an average growth rate above 7%. Our study found that in 2030, the estimated annual social costs of children with less than basic skills in Tajikistan would amount to $3.3 billion or 16% of the forecasted GDP. The non-monetary costs are also significant, as you will see in just a moment. So the proportion of youth not in education, employment, or training would be 47% higher if no action is taken and we stay on the same path, and a 72% increase in homicides would also be seen. Let's now take the case of Mexico. Mexico is one of the countries that we looked at where gender disparities exist at boys' expense. Our study found that in 2030, the estimated annual social costs of children with less than basic skills would amount to $310 billion US dollars. That is 20% of the forecasted GDP for Mexico. It's a significant number, as you can see here. If we look at the non-monetary costs, you can also see a 62% increase in the number of youth not in education, employment, or training, and a 76% increase in homicides. We see even larger proportions of forecasted GDP impact in other countries in the global south, where the share of children with less than basic skills is higher. So, what can we do to avert these costs from hitting individuals, governments, and society? Invest. Our report shows that investing in quality education is a cost-effective strategy for economic development. A 10% reduction in the shares of early school leavers and children with less than basic skills increases annual GDP by 1 to 2 percentage points. Reducing the number of early school leavers and children with less than basic skills by 1 percentage point can also lead to an annual global gain in labor income of 470 billion and over 650 billion US dollars, respectively. But what should countries invest in? We analyzed in our report policies and interventions that have proven to reduce school dropout and improve learning outcomes. Based on this review, we make 10 recommendations that speak to the funding of education, the creation of gender transformative learning environments that address the roots of inequality, investments in early childhood education to ensure a solid foundation for learning, second chance education that enables reskilling and upskilling, investing in school infrastructure and certainly the teaching workforce, ensuring student well-being, and expanding technical and vocational education and training. And finally, last but not least, data and research to ensure that all of our actions are taken on evidence. Finally, we would like to acknowledge the many efforts made by all countries, including yours, to achieve the sustainable development for inclusive quality education and lifelong learning. At the same time, UNESCO calls upon governments and partners to urgently step up investments in education to ensure that all girls and boys complete a full cycle of education by 2030, because education is one of the best investments for individuals, economies, and our planet. Be part of the action. Thank you.